Hello and welcome to Series Mania Melbourne, presented by ACMI, Film Victoria and Series Mania France. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, whose land we meet on, we share and we work. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from all nations of this land. And of course, people may be watching this from all over the country. I think it's really important to think about whose land you're standing on and you're working on every day that you do it, and think about the difficult history this country has and the ongoing surviving culture of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I'm Patricia Karvelas. I'm a radio and television host at the ABC, but I'm so thrilled to be hosting this conversation with actor Rachel Griffiths and Blackfella Films producer Darren Dale, in conversation about this excellent series of Total Control. The second series, can I say? Loved the first, and can I just, full declaration, already loving the second. Now, Rachel and Darren, two of the creators, of course, of Total Control, they first discussed the idea, I understand, at Series Mania in 2017. Rachel is also an executive producer. Welcome to both of you. I'm really excited to be hanging out with you, even in our weird distanced way. Rachel, just beginning with you. In the first season of Total Control, Alex Irving, who's Deborah Mailman's character, was behind your character's essential dethroning, right? That was the big betrayal, and then it led to the demise of your prime ministership. Talk to me about how your character develops in the second series.
That's a great intro. I guess in the first season, Rachel Anderson is very much set up as the antagonist, and she is the political operative whom we don't necessarily get much of an insight or window into her interior or non-political operative life. She's absolutely this political being, and that's who you see. And I guess that's a bit like how we see our politicians. We see the presented, the conferences, you deal with politicians all the time, dodging questions and trying to answer your question with their agenda. And I think the wonderful thing about second seasons generally is if you've had a successful first season where the characters have really walked in your lead character's shoes, your second season, I think, gives you the opportunity, because of the time you have and that foundation, to take secondary characters into new directions. So I think the wonderful thing, the trailer is "The Queen is Dead." That's me, long live the Queen. That's Deb, is by starting the second season with her dethroning and losing the thing that she has clearly wanted and fought for and sacrificed so much for, to start a second season at that point of character vulnerability, I think just allowed us to really kind of crack open the nut to find out how much of, I think, the woman remains after, particularly being a woman in conservative politics, has adopted positions and perhaps carried cognitive dissonances about the genderization of female politicians, and to really see what's left of the human. And that's really the journey, I think, of second season. What is she if she's not an antagonist? She's still a political operative, but is she going to be an ally? Is she going to come to understand what being an ally to a politician, an Indigenous First Nations woman, a woman of colour, is she going to be an ally? And can she reconcile with the reality that she had thought she was, but in fact had very much, I think, in the first season, had a very kind of paternalistic white woman, role in her own, not in her own mind, but I think from an objective point of view, to elevate Deb. I think she thought she was an ally, and I think in second season we're really testing that very idea of what does that actually look like, to come to understand.
Darren, I imagine the challenges of a second series are kind of vastly different to the first, right? Uh, Walk me through what you wanted to do with this story.
Yeah, look, just one thing I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Bundjalung land, which is my grandmother's country, and I'm blessed to be able to be on this country where she's from. But look, I think the big thing, Patricia, is that you just have all this expectation and you don't want to fuck it up, right? Because the first season was just so loved by audiences. We have these extraordinary actors, Deborah and Rachel, and then a fantastic ensemble cast. And I think the biggest thing for us was we wanted to live up, because often it can be such, a letdown. We've all watched shows where you kind of are like, God, I can't wait for the second season. You watch the first episode. And now we all have remotes, don't we? And we all have streaming platforms, and we have Stan and we have Foxtel, and we'd like, right, see you, we're not watching that. So I think, I think we also wanted to explore the female characters more. I think what our show does really well, and, not a lot of shows around the world, it's women taking control and they're creating their story. They're not just, and this is something Rachel talked about a lot when we conceived of the show, that women just weren't being affected by men and reacting to men and doing things, as a result of male decisions. Of course, it's politics and they are, of course, reacting to those things. But in this show, I think in this season, I think they get to go on a great romp with these two females through the, ups and downs. We have an election in the series. So, look, I think audiences will be drawn in as they were to the first season. But look, I'm always terrified as the producer. I'm always terrified about the first review. I'm terrified about the first teaser, what people will say. You trawl social media looking for any negative comment. But look, I think we should feel really proud. And it's the first time I've been able to say that I feel really proud of this season of the show.
Look, I've seen the 2 episodes and I think you deserve to feel proud. I think you're right, though, Darren. That is what happens, right? There is the sense of sometimes feeling let down the next time, because sometimes you don't get the magic back. I feel like you've kept the magic. Rachel, you must have been worried about that too. Everyone would be. How did you think about it, given those concerns? What did you think it needed to do to sort of take the story forward as well, not to just kind of repeat the same themes?
Well, I think the key concerns is, you go back to 2017 when Darren and I met, and although Trump had been elected, the last 3 years of the political cycle, watching the UK, watching the US, even tumultuous events here, even up until this very recent weeks with Gladys is I pitched this show as a very operatic show, and that was at a time when politics, I think, still seemed to have some semblance of stability. So we were reaching for the operatic, but what's kind of happened is the political world has really escalated to, some serious elements of crazy and discourses heightening, the very idea of the price of service, which is embedded in the first season, is carried through the second season. And I guess we just wanted to make sure, we were still relevant and that the cycle wasn't ahead of us. But, even since it's been in the can, issues of, defamation with politicians, with, death threats, with, in the last election, several independents and women on both sides having their electoral offices defaced by both sides, that the kind of crazy around the hothouse has gone up. So one thing was getting that in the same, world, while still really keeping, keeping our handle, I guess, on our central journeys, the central journey. I mean, the big question, I think, in this season is, can this woman, this First Nations politician, carrying all she's carrying, her own trauma, the trauma that starts off the first season, the death of her mother, the abuse and gendered and racial vilification she's copped, can she hold it together in this system long enough to change the things she wants to change? Can she survive the process of the sausage making, as vile as it can sometimes be, to get to the position of enacting generational positive change? And I think
I think that mirror, Rach, just to jump in there, I think that mirror is, I think, how people, ordinary people, feel in the world and the times that we're in. Like, is it worth the struggle? Is it worth the fight? Can you change things? Is the system so? And I know, like, you know, COVID and all the things that are being thrown up, but like the sort of craziness of the world. I think that bigger question about how we exist and how, you know, can you change? Can you fundamentally change things? And I know that lots of people have, you know, really, when they've seen the trailer even today, people are already starting to talk about those questions, like, and sort of like really feeling empathetic towards Deb, because I think people are feeling that themselves. Like, it's like, I want to fight, but how do I fight? And how do I change? And I think that's even, you know, just in your day-to-day life, like, can I change? You know, with the pressures of the world kind of as they are, I feel like Alex as a character and Rachel as a character, they do represent people that are trying to just claw on to controlling their destiny in a way.
Yeah, that's definitely the case with what happens for both of them. But I want to explore with you, actually, Darren, this intersectionality question, right? Which is so rare to see in drama and fiction, and yet you've explored so beautifully. You know, the idea of this prime minister in the first season who is a woman, and, you know, that's rare. We've only had one in our country, but, you know, that's obviously a very big deal, and yet that she's kind of colorblind, and, you know, she doesn't kind of get these issues. She thinks she's being good, and yet she's sort of so blind, and she's kind of bashing around and messing it up. How important, Darren, was it for you to kind of get that discussion into this series, particularly even in the second series? And do you think people are getting it? Is that sort of a conversation we're having more broadly?
Look, I think, one thing that's been really important and look, this was a real point of kind of coming together for Rachel and I, was like, I guess in a way we want to make purpose-led content. We want to make stuff that says something, but we want to make it for a broad audience, and we want to kind of, so I guess when then you have to shake that down, don't you? And we never want to be seen as being worthy. So we don't want to just explore, you know, black, white. And, you know, I think that's been important in all the work that we've done, you know, from Red for Now, like trying to introduce people to Aboriginal people that might be middle class or that might have middle class aspirations. And actually that kind of celebration and that shared humanity, like to understand each other as individuals. So I think for us, it's been really fundamental, just to see Deb's character, Alex Irving, as a woman that comes from a certain place. So I think we've tried to layer it, I think is what has been really important. I think we've tried to layer complexity that exists within all of us and trying then to fit that into like the wonderful thing that is drama. So I think we're always trying to say something. And I find it fascinating. I think, you know, that sort of idea, that casual paternalism, I sometimes talk about it, is, you know, like Rachel thinks she's doing the right thing. You know, she thinks she's like, great, she's got her in, she's going to get her a health centre. Yeah, she'll fix that, but she just needs to play the game. Like, you know, I've been in rooms where they go, God, you're one of the good ones, aren't you? And it's like, well, what does that mean? I'm one of the good ones? You know, like that still is said to me as recently as like 4 months ago. Oh God, you must be. So I just think the more we layer our show with that stuff, I think it just makes it more truthful and kind of making it as complex as possible and not falling for the tropey black, you know, white, good, bad. You know, I think that binary stuff is really kind of stuff that we've tried to stay away from it.
There is definitely, I think, a different consciousness this year about exploring a degree of white fragility through the character of Rachel. And I think that was only possible because she herself was vulnerable. So in first season, when she was on top of the world, there was just no way that she could come to understand the experiences that have shaped Alex and brought her into reacting and behaving the way she is. Rachel's like, it's a game. You know, I've given you the opportunity. I've given you the leg up. You know, you should read the rule book, you know, and play by these rules. She walked that amazing scene where she walked through Parliament House and it's just white people and, you know, the founding of the flag, you know, the whole place is really set up on the kind of vestiges of, you know, colonial consciousness. So I think we have been more conscious not to kind of tell the audience But there's this extraordinary scene between Deb and I after Q&A where I think we are very deeply exploring the inability of, educated white feminists to understand the limitations of their own feminism, and to do that just inside a character, just trying to get a head around it rather than it being, just an idea that's presented or spoken about. We never speak about it, but it's fully kind of on display that is the journey. And I think we as white feminists are actually kind of waking up to conversations that, we haven't had enough of.
Darren, this intersectionality question is a really interesting one, particularly after the year we've just had. And I'd love to hear both of you reflect on the year we've just had. Not the COVID part of the year. Let's just park that, although I will ask in a moment about how that affected how you did this show. But I'm talking about Brittany Higgins's allegations, the way that this story then unfolded, the women's marches, which I think were I hadn't seen anything like it in my lifetime. As a young feminist, I never imagined that this would happen in my lifetime, that women would be calling out this kind of behaviour in the time frame that they have. And then, Darren, First Nations women saying, we've been saying this forever, you just didn't notice us. And again, it became so obvious to me that those women's marches, and they have important merit, but again, were marginalising women of colour. How has this year's, the issues that have emerged this year kind of reflected what you're doing in this second series as well? I imagine that the timing is almost incredible, right? For you.
Yeah, like it's kind of scary and kind of weird, and like I feel sort of like we're literally still just finishing the final episodes. So I feel like, I think a couple of reflections. I think season 1, it was almost like we were kind of ahead of the zeitgeist in a way. Like it was like, Black Lives Matter. Suddenly there was, the death in America. The last words of that man were, "I can't breathe." We had a show that had a young girl die in custody. The last words she uttered were, "I can't breathe." So it's, to your point, Patricia, I think these things that we've known about as First Nations people, our experiences, the things that happen to us, the things that we want to talk about in art and, in television, it feels like I still feel like I'm in this heady swirl of like life imitating art, art imitating life. But I think at the truth of that is we've had these experiences. We just get to have this amazing platform to talk about them, right? And I think the power of drama and what we've seen through Redfern now, I think the power of drama is that you, and Rachel's point, you can experience this change in the comfort of your lounge room, and you can have these conversations about where you sit in relation to First Nations people, in relation to women, and you can start to have those conversations in your lounge room with your partner, with your wife. I think that is the great thing this does. But I think, like I'm sure Rachel will talk more, but it was kind of surreal, like making this show in the times that we were in, and to a degree created some nervousness. We were asking Parliament House to shoot in a building, let's not forget, where had been the site of kind of this, these claims. And we were wanting to make a show about a Black female politician, a Conservative Prime Minister who's just been overthrown. Like, it's been sort of a strange experience the whole way through, I think, Rachel, don't you?
Yeah. Look, I think Darren and I share a kind of similar, zeitgeist chasing energy. Not just because, but we both want our shows to make audiences. So I think any idea Darren has or I have, it's like, why and who will want to see it, and what form will they want to see it in. The kind of Me Too movement that came out of Parliament this last year was not a surprise to me, because I was having conversations decades ago with women who had experienced that kind of behaviour in various parliaments, state and federal, and had watched the very extraordinary, uncalled out gendered abuse of Natasha Spott-Despoja and Sarah Hanson-Young and other young women that I knew in the state system. So I think it was a surprise that it exploded, but I think what was really revealed over the last year is this enormous gap now between corporate regulation and corporate HR, systems and procedures that really have been stamping out this behaviour for a far, longer amount of time. And the revelation, of course, of just how much alcohol there is in Parliament and in the bubble, and how that may play out in terms of the not respecting, of boundaries. But it was kind of really wonderful to see even women who had been in politics for a really long time and may honestly have not experienced that behaviour just because of their natures, sending off certain signals, or maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they weren't as sensitive. Maybe they just got lucky with really good bosses. But for them to kind of admit that they had become so inured and used to that being the culture that they themselves had stopped calling it out. And then it took a young woman like Brittany to call them to arms.
And that generational change, how that's kind of created the impetus for change too. Look, I mentioned it, so it would be weird not to go back to it. Let's talk about filming a TV show during a pandemic, which sounds really hard to me, particularly with the way this country now has, state border closures. Talk me through it, Darren. Was it a total pain in the butt?
Yeah, look, yes, it really was. It was. But look, I think the thing is, we were in that moment of optimism, where we were still open. People, the States was having a much worse time. So I think we had great strength from that. There were big shows here, big American shows filming. There was protocols developed. Everyone worked really quickly. Everyone wanted to keep the industry going. But look, it wasn't without problems. We couldn't go back to Winton where we filmed to Queensland because I was so nervous about the border, and we made a call really early on that I said, look, let's not go to Queensland. I think we should just stay in one state. The degree of difficulty with this show is already high enough. We, filming in Parliament House, filming in Sydney, and then filming in Queensland. So we kind of made some sacrifices. We filmed it all in New South Wales. We were lucky. We just, we had some problem moving actors, but I think generally the feeling was here that we were just so lucky that we were making something. And we really got out of it quite unscathed, to be honest. But look, but I say that the team behind us, the production team, like hats off to them, because the hours that they worked, the things that they had to deal with, the additional layers, and, that's where the government also, I have to say, have been incredibly generous here. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to comply with COVID safety, which of course is critical, but that has meant that there's really everyone's had to put their hands in their pockets to keep these shows turning and to keep, the ecosystem of film production happening. And we're lucky we got there.
You are lucky you got there. We're lucky you got there. Rachel, I mean, not only are you executive producer, but you're actually an actor, one of the main actors in this show. Was it difficult for you?
Look, I just had a tremendous fear that, I'd already done 3 full quarantines before we started shooting this. So between June last year and the 1st of December, I'd done a month, and I've since done another 2 weeks. So I think for me, it was just that fear of I'd been stuck on the wrong side of borders from my family, being unable to come back and then being unable to see me. So I had kind of these long periods last year, waiting for the next job that I had committed to, but not being able to get home. And
that's been tough, Rach, right? The actual, not being able to be, or just jump on a plane. Oh, darling, don't worry. The crying phone call, darling, I'll jump on a plane. I can't imagine actually how that must feel. And I think the sacrifice that Rachel's made to be available for, not just our show, but other shows is, I don't think you can underestimate being in hotel rooms. I think people have views of stars are in fancy houses. No, Rachel was in hotel rooms the size of this, and,
And I think, going back to purpose-led content, thank God every show I was doing, I cared about. Because had I signed on to some, shit show for the money, and then I'm sitting there unable to see my family for 9 weeks, I really think my it's that thing. If you have meaning, you can bear whatever you bear. So, but we were very lucky. There was this window that we got where Victoria and New South Wales were open during this show where I could go back and forward. There was one actor who, because of his vulnerabilities, was unable to come onto the second season. So that was probably the biggest impact.
And of course, the disappointment, like the town of Winton in Queensland was so welcoming and was so wonderful to us to have to make that call and tell them. And, to regional towns that have done it tough through drought already and kind of, the world that we're in, that was a heartbreaking call to have to say to them, we're not coming, because we don't know if we'll get there and we can't risk this, substantial, expensive production being ground to a halt. So, that was a tough call. But, I think the good thing for the audience is, and bring it back to the show, I think the good thing is that we don't have COVID in the show. And I think there's been a real relief for audiences, given that they're experiencing it. I don't think they want to see masks in a show. They don't want to see COVID. They want to talk about QR codes. I feel like people just want to watch drama. And hopefully, I think we made the right call, Rach.
I think the interesting thing is because it's really finishing on the eve of COVID, is that the audience know, for the finale, where those characters think, that their journey is now going to be, we, the audience, watching the difficulty of leadership over the last 18 months, we're like, oh my God, you've got no idea what's coming. And I think one difference between our first season and our second season is I do think the COVID experiences has attuned us to that politics isn't a game, that the decisions that, Frydenberg's making over JobKeeper or Anastasia with the border or Gladys and her strategies, their decisions, I can't think of a parallel moment since, conscription or World War II, where we really understand that the decisions that these people, our elected representatives, are making can profoundly impact our lives, from not being there when our loved one is dying to keeping the rates of death as low as they are, So I think a political show, although there's no masks in the show and COVID isn't in the show, I think the audience is going to be watching this idea of leadership and government in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. I often think we've never had politics in our lives quite as much as we do now, right? The fact that these signature press conferences are watched by, and I work on the news channel at the ABC, our numbers are huge for these events. People are glued to them. The literacy around politics and policy is through the roof.
You're right. It's had a profound way that we see our engagement with what we expect from politicians, what we think politics means for us, and how it actually affects our lives. I just think we will never, generations will be altered by the way they feel about our engagement with power.
And I think on that note, it's, and that purpose-led content, Darren and I were very determined not to make a show that was House of Cards. Like, they're all rotten. They're all after themselves. This show really goes back to the importance of leadership and government and participating in democracy. And I would feel like we've failed if we create a show that, in a moment of distrust or various levels of trust, the grief for Gladys, the wild love of Mark McGowan, we absolutely need to keep faith that good leadership and good government can make better lives. And I hope our show, while showing how hard it is, and I hope we don't put women off going in, and I hope we're not putting off First Nations women saying, I'm going to become a senator. Because the more diversity and representative that those chambers become, I think the better, the nation will be served. But
I think that's right. Now, I think they still got to front up. Actually, they're going to keep fronting up and making that, questioning the major parties. I just want to ask you, Darren, and I'd love you to comment too, Rachel, about two things I noticed. One was in terms of themes that I'm really interested in politics that showed to me you're really on the zeitgeist. One is the rise of independence, right? That giving away your whole plot. People need to watch this thing. It's great. But the machinery around it, that grassroots campaigning, like we saw it with Zali Steggall's campaign, Kathy McGowan, like we've seen this shift in politics, and you really explore that really well in this series, which is different. Like there's a rejection of both party machines. In fact, this is not a partisan show. You're able to show that the left and the right side of politics are actually in some ways equally toxic in the way that they operate, Darren.
No, I think we do. Like, I think, we're really responding to that. We're responding to that conversation, that disenfranchisement of, both people within their parties. I think we show the factionalism that exists. I think we show the way that, and to Rachel's point before about the operatic level, I think, it would seem strange that we would think that these people could have the balance of power, but actually that's playing out in real life. And I think it gave us a way as well, in dramatic terms, just to, say the obvious, to bring our characters together again, potentially. It gave us a chance to bring, Rachel and Deb together, who are the central characters in this series. But yeah, I think this, again, the relevance of this show, and, without giving the entire plot away, but, what the independents can do and what power they might hold is just, I think it just makes for great for audiences to be able to think about the power that one can have if they really want to try and grasp it.
And on the other side of that, I loved this, I've been tracking this, obviously with, the Voices for Indi and these movements to independence, but this show is also not saying that this is the answer to our distrust in politics. And there are some really key questions. I think on one level, both these women have become independents because what they have found is, free of the party machines, they are more able to be true to themselves. And that is this liberating experience when you're not kind of being corralled by the party room. I think there's also another thing that we're seeing as people are leaving their parties because they don't want to compromise, is it's also capturing something deep about our suspicion now of compromise. Whereas I think the great thing about the parties having a broad church is they've got to kind of thrash it out and have a broad church. And as when you start to kind of say, well, I don't agree with that, so I'm leaving, and I don't agree with that. I can't agree on enough to stay in your club. I want it all my way. I want to go my way alone. Sell that. It's also kind of talking about the rise of popularism, which is very dangerous. The rise of the one being having the true voice, which is also dangerous. The personality of the independent, which is dangerous. And funding-wise, the idea that, if we're talking about special interest funding, well, it's very expensive to kind of fund a Labor Party or the Liberal Party or the National parties to election. It's much cheaper to pick up 4 independents. So we are certainly not saying this is the answer.
Like, I think we also do, though, explore, Rach, with the characters. I think we also explore, though, the same level of dealing and wheeling and what it takes and what you need to forsake and what are the compromises. And, I think we don't represent, I think Rachel's right, we don't represent that it's a rosy road, but I think we do try and show that, it's equally fraught, and without a machine behind you, you are there by yourself. And I think that's the wonderful thing about drama. Deborah Mailman, her dilemma is so visceral, to feel her trying to engage, what can she conceive? Who's she up against? Where's the money coming from? Like, all of those things we explore. And I think if you want to explore that and you want to have an underdog, I think audiences just delight watching Deb be that character. And I know that in making the show, I think, she finds it very hard. And look, Deb she says this, she said it before, Deb finds it really hard going home to decompress from being that character, because Deb is, of course, so unlike that person, that she plays in the show. I think she said to me the other night on the phone, she said, sometimes I just want to be more like her sometimes.
I think we want Deb to stay just the way she is, quite frankly.
Deb is extraordinary, right? She's super extraordinary.
Hey, I want to ask you, Disney's ABC Studios in the US is currently working on a pilot adaptation of the show. Is that still happening, Darren?
It is still happening. The ABC, they're maybe not going to go ahead, and it may go to another network. We're not sure at the moment, but they certainly, yeah, you're right though. The show got picked up and is for a format remake in the States, and a First Nations writer was engaged to write the pilot script, and Rachel and I both read it, and it is a fantastic pilot script. It's kind of weird reading our story, just kind of contextualized in an American space. But yeah, look, I'm still hopeful that something might happen in the US. And it was super exciting that there's a First Nations guy who's a showrunner being the lead person on it, which was kind of fucking amazing for me, really, to think that this little show that happened in Australia can then be put in the hands of a Native American man, you know, to help with an incredible showrunner. So yeah, look, we've still got hopes that it will be remade in the US.
Yeah, Rachel, it is a pretty amazing thing, though, that it has been picked up. I'm not surprised. It's good. So, you know, that's usually what happens if something's good.
Well,
it'll be picked up. But
I think it, I was certainly aware when I was working on American television, the underrepresentation of African-American stories, and Shonda was only kind of starting to have power. And I would, you know, be at those big events where the other shows were there, and it was like there was the black show, and then there were all the kind of white shows, you know, and never in my time there did I meet any First Nations storytellers working in television. And I think, you know, obviously with Tyker's amazing show Reservation Dogs, there is a recognition that First Nation stories have been entirely left off American screens, unless they're the kind of second, third sidekick cop, you know, of the white cop show, you know, in Montana or Wyoming, where they're still kind of playing the Indian, really. So I think the appetite to start to acknowledge First Nations American history, and the fact that they can look at a successful show like this, because they're like, well, how would we do that? And someone says, well, have a look at this show. And they're like, right, yeah, no, I could totally see that working. You know, for Darren to be the beacon to show how it can be done is, you know, I'm so proud that his impact is global to do proof.
And I think I think the next step on that, like, it was great to see Sterling Harjo, who was one of the creators with Taika. Like, those guys, we all hung out at Sundance, you know, like 15 years ago. So it's been a long road to get some brown faces on the screen, you know, in the US. And it's, you know, and it's been a road here as well. I think the next step that we need to make, and one that I'm really keen that we keep talking about, is that, you know, we're happy to have so many freaking cop shows. We're happy to have procedurals. We're happy to have courtroom dramas. But, you know, there's still that thing, oh, we've got the Indigenous show. We've got the Native American show. And I guess that's the next frontier that we've got to push through. Like, there doesn't just have to be one of us all the time. You don't have to pick which brown person you want to work with, you know, or which First Nations people you want to work with. Actually, we can have many seats at many tables, and we can be like all the other genres. You can have 100 cop shows that are made around the world a year, because guess what? Audiences love them. So I think, you know, we're on the cusp of trying to imagine a new future where, you know, there's not just one of us all the time. There's one American show, there's one Australian show. Like, I want there to be a multiplicity of us, that actually people just want to engage with us.
Because there's that many stories, right? That's
completely.
And they're really compelling stories.
And also there's such diversity, as you know, Patricia, there's such diversity within our communities. Our experiences as First Nation people around the world are so diverse. My experience as a man who grew up in New South Wales is so different to someone who grew up in, you know, regional WA. Like, I just think, you know, the more that we open our hearts and minds to this wealth of storytelling, we've just got this pot that's going to reveal so much about what we share, but also so much that is kind of, we can embrace, you know, about our distinct cultures.
One of the exciting things about season 2 is that we have expanded the cast, and you know, Stephanie Tisdale comes in as a campaign organizer. Rob Collins really steps up to another level. not his acting, but the size of the role is really expanded. So even within this show, there is that, diversity of characterizations and complex skills, personalities, and abilities.
It is an incredibly excellent series. I cannot wait to get to the rest of the episodes too.
Thanks, PK. And if you listen, you might hear the dulcet tones of Patricia Karvelas in the show at different points. So that's one for the audiences out there to listen for. But thanks.
Thank you for letting me do that, because it's the only kudos I've ever got in my own family with my kids, because they're like, that is cool, Mum. Now, I just want to let everyone know who's enjoyed this conversation to watch more of Series Mania Melbourne on ACMI's Cinema 3. And, of course, make sure that you watch Total Control Series 2 as soon as you can. If you haven't seen Series 1, well, you've completely missed out, so make sure you do that too.
You can binge them together.
I want to thank you both. I think you're both legends, and you're both great company too. Rachel Griffiths, Darren Dale, thank you so much.